Hello, everyone. We recognize that tonight is Diwali as well, and we are thankful for the light that this celebration brings to our table. Welcome. I am Liz Garten-Scanlon, pronouns she, her, and as Katie just mentioned, I'm faculty co-chair with my friend Jenny Ziegler of the Writing for Children and Young Adults program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. And I am coming to you from my home, which sits on the ancestral lands of the Humanos, Tonkawa, Sana, Comanche, and Coahuiltecan people in a city currently called Austin, Texas. I am representing, though, the Vermont College of Fine Arts, which stands on Abenaki land. I am grateful to be here. I am grateful that you are here with me. Let's turn our attention now to our honored guests. The writer Marion Dane Bauer was born, raised, and still lives in the Midwest, but lucky for us, she was one of the founding faculty members, and indeed the very first faculty chair for our program in Writing for Children and Young Adults at VCFA. She is the author of many exquisite picture books, chapter books, nonfiction, and novels, the latest of which, Sunshine, we'll hear more about tonight. Marion has lots of accolades to her name, including the esteemed Newbery Honor, something she shares with her friend and fellow panelist, Kathi Appelt. Like Marion, Kathi has been a prolific and adored writer of many forms, including poetry and picture books, middle grade and young adult novels. And like Marion, Kathi has been part of our VCFA community from the very early days, even though she's Texan through and through. Tonight, we'll hear about her latest project too, Once Upon a Camel, and just generally be lucky flies on the wall as Kathi and Marion sit together and chat. So everyone, let's do that now.
Okay, well, I just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We feel so lucky to be with all of you. Marion and I have been friends for a long time. And I will say that when I met her, the first time I actually met her, I was on the third floor of Noble Hall on campus, and she walked up and said, "Hey, I'm Marion," and I don't even think I could speak. I was so starstruck. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to be here with Marion. My pronouns are she, hers. I come to you from what is known as the Brazos Valley in Texas, and it is the ancestral home of the Tonkawa and contemporary home as well. So anyway, so I'm going to let Marion introduce herself and we'll go from there.
And I'm Marion Dane Bauer, and my pronouns are she, her, and I come to you from Dakota land, which is now called St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay, Marion, I'm just gonna kick us off here and ask you to read from your newest novel, Sunshine. So you can get the ball rolling.
All right, since our conversation is going to give away the one secret that is kept in the book for a brief for the early chapters, I'm going to read the material that gives away that secret. And I'm going to start with a passage that describes Sunshine, the little dog. As always happens, though, the instant he calls her to mind, Sunshine is there, not next to him this time, but running toward him down the rickety dock. Her long ears fly, her reddish gold fur gleams, her paws splay happily in every direction. The sight of that galumphing run warms Ben's belly. Sunshine slides to a stop next to him, plops her butt down and smiles her sweet doggy smile. "Don't worry," the smile says, "I'm here. You know I'm always here." Ben lays a hand on her hard little skull and goes back to watching the approaching canoe. And I'll skip forward. Ben has come to northern Minnesota, far northern Minnesota, just below the Canadian border, to see his mother, whom he hasn't seen since he was 3 years old. She left him and the family, his father, at that time. And he has decided that he wants to reconnect with her. And so he's asked to come to where she lives, which is a rustic cabin on a lake in the far northern, just below the Canadian border in Minnesota. And so in that first scene, he was waiting for her to appear in a canoe to gather him. Now he's in the cabin. His mother has told him that he's going to be sleeping in a loft. And Ben is a very cautious boy. He's a very frightened boy. He's a boy who tries to keep safety around him at all times. And he doesn't like the idea of having to climb the ladder, of going up to the loft, but he does it. He goes up and puts his suitcase there and comes back down. He steps down onto the floor and looks to Sunshine for approval. She knows how he hates high up places. She knows everything about him. But the trip must have tired her out. She usually watches him every minute. That's her job, watching him. Now she's stretched out on the floor, her back legs poking straight out behind, chin resting on her paws, eyes closed, sound asleep. She didn't even see what he did. His mother paid no attention either. She's busy putting away groceries, and now she's coming toward him, a carton of eggs in each hand. She's not paying the least bit of attention to the small dog sprawled directly in her path. "Stop," Ben cries, "you're going to step on." His mother stops. She stops and stares at him. Then she looks down at her feet, at the floor in front of her feet, and then at him again. "Ben," she says, "it's a question." But he can't explain. There's no way, because Sunshine isn't there. Not really. She's never been there. He knows that. Even when he forgets, he knows. Sunshine is a story, an imaginary dog dreamed up by a 3-year-old kid. A story dog that has hung around far too long. At least that's what his father thinks. And now his mother will think the same. But she doesn't seem to be thinking anything. She's just standing there waiting for an explanation. "It's nothing," he says finally. "It's just nothing." She goes on studying him until he begins to itch. Then at last she says, "Okay, let me show you the neat little cooler I have. It's right here beneath the floor." And when she lifts a couple of boards to show him the deep hole dug beneath the floor and the bucket on a rope that can be lowered into the earth to keep food cool, Ben pretends to be very interested.
Oh, Marion, thank you. I'm glad you read that passage because the heart of this novel has so much to do with Ben's longtime need for his imaginary friend. I think I told you I have an acquaintance who tells me that he still had his own imaginary friend at the age of 12. And when he told me that, I was stunned because, I always associate imaginary friends with very young children. So can you talk about both the imaginary pup and the decisions you made about Ben?
Okay. One of the convictions that grows stronger and stronger in my life and in my days is that we create our world in our minds. We create our lives in our minds. It's what we do in here that makes everything different. And so that makes everything what it is, rather. And so that's what charmed me about the idea of a boy, an older boy. I ended up not giving him an age because of the question of how old could he be and still have an imaginary friend. And so I just didn't name his age so that people could decide for themselves how old he could be. But because of that fundamental issue for me of what is real, and what is real is what we create in our minds is real. That's what I started with on the story. And then the next question I had to answer immediately was, okay, why is an older boy still running around with an imaginary friend? What's going on? And so in answering that question, I decided, all right, his mother left him when he was 3 years old, and the dog that he created was a substitute for his mother. And she's not come back all this time, and so he's kept the dog around. And that led into the next thing. Okay, his mother abandoned him when he was 3 years old. How does he feel about this? Well, my first response was pretty darn mad. He's really angry about it. And in fact, in the early drafts of the book, he was this angry kid, and he didn't want to be there. His mother and dad had decided it was time for him to spend time with his mother, and he was kind of being sent to this remote place to be with her. And so I worked with it that way for a long time. And I liked this kid less and less. And one evening, I was watching a movie. I don't remember the name of the movie, but the premise of the movie was a mother was dying, and there were two children. One was a little boy, maybe about 9, and a 13-year-old girl. The little boy was being loving, thoughtful, caring, the nicest little kid you could want. The 13-year-old girl was being a 13-year-old girl, and she was pissed. She was so mad at her mother for dying. And by the end of the movie, you absolutely could not stand the kid. And it didn't matter that I had the maturity to understand why she was being the way she was, and that was a natural way a girl that age might respond. I could not stand her. And I turned around the next day and looked at Sunshine and said, oh, that's what I'm doing here too. And who can get on board with a kid who's angry from day one? And so I turned the story inside out and decided that Ben is the one who wants to see his mother. Ben is the one who's insisting on going to see his mother, and turned the anger into longing. But of course, the anger is there. Now it's under the surface. Now it bubbles up in ways he doesn't want it to bubble up. And it controls the story still, but it's hidden, mostly it's hidden from Ben, and comes out in ways the reader gets to see.
I remember reading an early draft of this story and being struck by the role of anger, but also totally buying it. I mean, why wouldn't a kid be completely upset by a mother who really literally walks out and doesn't really hear from her at all for quite a while? And then when you sent me the arc, I read through it, I was like, she changed this. And you're right, the anger is still there, but it is not blocking the bigger need, the bigger yearning that Ben has for his mother, which I think you did so successfully. I'm so glad you changed it.
I think the fundamental thing is we can all connect with longing. We have a harder time connecting with anger. The anger pushes everybody away, including the readers.
Yeah. And I love the way that you had it in a kind of a smoldering way. And especially later when the whole, when you have this smoldering fire that occurs, but I'm not going to give any more of that away. That has a lot to do with landscape. And one of the key elements of this story is the landscape, that upper, that very far north landscape that is all water and woods and so remote, so few people ever experience that, but you really bring it to life. So as you know, that's my jam, landscape. So I wonder if you'd talk about that a bit.
Okay, I love northern Minnesota. I've never experienced it in the kind of deep way that people who canoe through the boundary waters do, but I have been there many times. And I love trees and I love wilderness. I've had a kayak for many years, and my idea of heaven is paddling around a small lake in a kayak, just that sort of connection with the water. And so the landscape ends up doing two things for me. It lets us know a great deal about the mother, because it's the one place in the world that she feels safe. And what it says about a woman that should be living alone in the wilderness because she feels safe there, and she doesn't feel safe anywhere else, tells us a great deal about her without having to unfold a lot of other things. The other thing I used the landscape for was because I've mentioned Ben is a really cautious kid, a really scaredy cat kind of kid. His dad calls him a what if kid. And going into this environment where there are potentially wolves, bears, all kinds of animals, as well as the potential for getting lost when you turn around, is a huge challenge for him, and creates physical challenges as well as the emotional challenge that he carries into the story to start with.
Well, and the contrast you have that you create by, putting this very, protected, maybe super protected by his dad, kid into this very remote, wild place. And almost the minute he gets there, he starts hearing, the sound of the loon scares him. He really is pretty scared of everything. And so when he actually does take action on his own, it's striking, it's because you've created that initial contrast between him and wildness. So he, even via the pup, the imaginary dog, which is a domestic animal, you've put these two domestic animals basically into a wild space, and it totally works.
Okay, Kathi, speaking of landscape, you're a Texan and most of your novels are set in Texas. Isn't that right?
Yes. Well, with the exception of one novel that I co-wrote with Allison McGee, who I met like within minutes of meeting you on that third floor hallway of Noble Hall. And that's set in Vermont. So my two hard places, I think, Texas and Vermont.
Yes, Vermont is instantly a heart place once you've been there.
Yes.
The Texas landscape and culture give your work so much of its distinctive flavor. And this one is a Texas story, too, camels and all. Once upon a camel. So tell us, camels in Texas? I would love to know more about that history.
Well, first of all, I do want to say, several years ago, I was working on a lecture actually, and I realized that the three things that that we are that give us our motivation to write, our motivation to get through our lives, really, that there are three major things that we love, that we would give our lives for, that generate the most heat in our lives, and they all start with P. So I call those the world Ps. It's WHIRLED. And thank you to Liz Garten Scanlon who gave me that title. And they are people, obviously, and pets, which I think are sometimes underrated, and places. Places really do carry quite a bit of meaning for us. And that's why when we see refugees, or we see people who have been forced out of their homes, to realize that they've left places that are so special to them and so sacred to them that it really is a heart-bending, heart challenging aspect of our lives. And so they're not to be underestimated. But I think often in our work, we do overlook place as a really valuable element for our craft. So, but camels in Texas, okay. Camels are not indigenous to Texas. And so years ago when I was a little girl, my grandfather told me that there were wild camels in West Texas. Of course, I was little and I just said, well, of course there are. My grandfather told me that. Why would he lie? Why wouldn't there be camels in Texas? And so I asked that question for most of my life. Why wouldn't there be camels in West Texas? Well, there's a lot of reasons why there wouldn't be camels in West Texas. They're not indigenous to West Texas, unless you go back about 10,000 years, and then there actually are fossil records of camels in Texas, but they were, gigantic camels, and they essentially migrated over the land bridge with the woolly mammoths and the cave lions, and except with the exception of some that went south and evolved into today's alpacas and vicuñas and llamas. So anyway, we could go on all night about camels. I know a lot about them now. But it wasn't until just a few years ago that I said, why? Why are there camels? Why were there camels in West Texas? Well, it turns out that the US Army back in the 1850s decided to do an experiment with camels. They needed some some reliable transportation between basically San Diego and San Antonio. And as you know, the land between those two cities, those two spots, is mostly desert and lots of mountains, but very treacherous terrain. And the horses and mules they were using at the time weren't cutting it. It was just too hard on them. So somebody suggested camels, and it took a few years, of convincing, but the U.S. Congress approved an experiment to import camels from the Middle East. And it turns out the person who really championed the camel experiment was the Secretary of War, and that person at that time was Jefferson Davis. Now, there's a lot of, discussion about his motives. Some people think that he really wanted to open up the West to increase the slave trade. And there's probably knowing Jefferson Davis, there's probably some truth to that. But the other truth is that the camels were really successful. They imported them on, brought them across on boats, on a sailing ship called the USS Supply. And they turned out to be, really successful. And after the war, though, after the Civil War, they were largely ignored during the war. But after the war, nobody wanted anything to do with anything that Davis had his fingerprints on, which, he didn't become glamorous again until the Jim Crow era. So because the Camel Corps was so closely connected to him, they were disbanded. And most of them were actually auctioned off. Some of them went to circuses, some of them went to mines, silver mines, gold mines, even salt mines, and were used as pack animals. But then a few were just set free in the desert, and thus my hero, my wild camel of West Texas, is Zada. And she's a camel that's been, brought over from Turkey and worked for a while and then set free. And I named her for Scheherazade because she has a lot of stories to tell. So there you have it.
Thank you. Now, would you read us a few pages? I want people to hear that rich storyteller's voice you've created.
Thank you. I will be happy to read. I'll read from the very, very opening. So, like I said, Zada, she's an old camel. She has very creaky knees. She's alone, but she has an adopted family of American kestrels, and American kestrels are the smallest of the falcon family. So I'm just going to start there. It's set in 1910 in the foothills of the Chisos Mountains, which is now familiarly known as Big Bend National Park. So here they are. Incoming. Even in her sleep, Zada recognized that voice. The old camel raised one eyelid. It was still dark. She did not recall setting an early alarm bird. Zada settled deeper into her sandy furrow, yawned. But before she could drift back off, here it came, a high-speed bundle of flapping kestrel feathers, American kestrel to be specific, smallest of the falcon family, and it barreled directly towards Zada's face. peck, peck, peck. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Zada, wake up. Perlita, in a pecking frenzy. Ouch, 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 and more ouch. Any chance for more sleep now was fully dashed. Zada, Perlita said, it's the worst news. Perlita did a hoppity hoppity dance on Zada's nose. Then she puffed herself up, so anxious she could hardly contain herself. Zada waited. Perlita puffed. Long pause. More puffing. Long pause number 2. Puff, puff, puff. Long pause number 5,863. Extreme puffing. Finally, Zada couldn't stand it. Chirp it out, she said. At last, Perlita, still maximally puffed, cut loose with a dizzying trail of words that quickly turned into a torrent, which she strung together into an array of please and killies. As best Zada could make out, Perlita's monologue went something like, there's a mountain coming toward us, a huge, huge mountain, the tallest in history, and it's so big and so tall, it's taking up the entire world, the entire universe, and it's moving our way. Perlita's voice had gone so fevered that it made Zada wince, even without the message that was attached to it. And the message was, it's going to eat us, Zada. I'm telling you, there's a mountain coming our way. It's sucking everything into its big, big, big behemoth belly. Zada looked around. It was still dark, but she could tell by the thin rays of the dawn's early light that the Chiso sat squarely in the same places they'd always sat. She could see their peaks right where they should be, just below the stars. I don't see anything, says Zada, trying to fathom what on earth had ruffled Perlita's feathers. You can't see it from here, said Perlita, her distress growing by the second. It's coming across the canyon. The canyon? Asked Zada. From their vantage point near the creek, the canyon was hidden behind a set of ridges and a wide plateau. Ordinarily, Zada avoided the canyon. When she stood at the top of it and stared down at its steep, jagged walls, it made her dizzy. Standing at the bottom of it and looking up at its steep, jagged walls, she got woozy. Of course, a canyon is not a problem for a kestrel. Perlita flew over it all the time, which was how she had spotted the moving mountain, which she was sure was going to eat them, which made her peck, peck, peck. Ouch! Zada wrinkled her nose. Oh, sorry, said Perlita, catching herself mid-frenzy. A tuft of camel fur was caught on the side of her beak. She flapped into the air and zip, she buzzed again, first one way, then the other. Then she shot straight up, banked, and made a death-defying mid-air U-turn. Zip! She buzzed back the other way and paused in front of Zada's face, only long enough to say, the mountain, it's eating everything, even the stars. But Perlita, Zada tried to follow her flight when zing, a second blurry object flew by her face. Pard, Perlita's one and only. He zoomed by so fast he made the stars blink. Then he circled back and landed right between the camel's eyes. Zada, he exclaimed, there's a mountain. It's going to eat us. So there you have it.
Oh, that's so lovely, Kathi. But one of the things I so admire about your work is your ability to weave humor throughout. Is your whatever the story is you're telling, and however serious it is. And I think that is such a talent. It just always impresses and amazes me. I have another question. The history of camels in Texas must surely have charmed you when you first learned about it. What a perfect foundation for a novel. But we all know that charm is not enough to sustain a story. Somewhere deep inside every idea, you must discover your own heart, your own longing. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the idea can't hold. It's what teachers are reaching for when they ask students to talk about theme in our novels. But I'm going to frame the question a little differently. What did the story teach you about yourself when you were writing it? What did it teach you about your world? And was this a new discovery or one you have returned to many times in many other stories?
Well, leave it to you to ask the hard questions. As you know, every story teaches us something about ourselves. I really believe that. I will say that this book will always be my pandemic book. And there were so many moments when I really wondered, if it even mattered. I mean, with so much darkness, so much craziness going on in the world, where was this story going to fit in? Was there even a place for it in the world? And why was I even writing it? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I asked those questions, or, I felt that kind of worry or despair. I guess maybe despair, actually, that what was the point? I mean, that was a kind of an ongoing question while I was writing it. But the thing I kept returning to was first my true belief that stories save us. And it's interesting because early on, Susan, our colleague Susan Fletcher, read this, and she said, "Kathi, you've written the first sheltering in place book." But I do believe that stories save us, and it was what Scheherazade knew, of course, and what I had experienced in my own life. Years ago, I attended weekly meetings of Al-Anon. My family has a long history of addiction, and I found some refuge there. I found a lot of refuge there for several years. But it didn't take me several years. In fact, it was early on at one of the meetings I attended, and I walked out and I was thinking about it. And I realized that, the steps, the AA steps are helpful. There's some, there's some good things about those, and they do seem helpful. But I realized what was saving us in those meetings were the stories, the sharing of our stories in a safe place together. And, and for me, for all of us, it's a major part of being a human being, is telling stories and sharing stories and participating in that is what opens our hearts. And so when I thought about Scheherazade and, and the way she saved herself and her colleagues, her sisters and the other women, I couldn't help but think about Zada saving her little chicks with her stories. And so this is something that I've believed for a long time. And actually, I had wanted to write a story whose theme was storytelling saves us, that stories are our lifeline to each other and to our hearts and to ourselves. And so, so in a way, Zada is my doppelganger. I admit it freely, an old citizen with stories to tell and decidedly creaky knees to boot. So the other thing is, and I know we're going to get into age here in a sec, just a little foreshadowing. I felt like it was important for a children's book to feature an older character as the central narrator. Mostly the narrators of kids' books are young, and there are good reasons for that. But I really wanted this narrator in this book to be an older, an older character. And because, children have older people in their lives, so why shouldn't an older character narrate the book? I suspect that's why this book gets compared sometimes to Ivan, the one and only Ivan, because that is also an older narrator. I don't know, but I loved having a character that I so readily identified with, an older person telling stories with creaky knees. So, but the other thing, that brought that really came into focus for me during the pandemic was the urgent need for joy. And so I actually put a Post-it note on my computer that said, "Give joy a chance." And so I kept returning to that, every day while I was working on this story, give joy a chance. And then finally, after Eric Roman, who did the wonderful art in the book, when he sent the art in, I realized that camels' mouths kind of naturally curl up, so they look like they look happy to me. They look like, so it's an animal that to me kind of maybe has some innate joy, and I'm sure that's me imposing my human emotions onto a camel, but oh well, there you go. Give joy a chance. So I think ultimately that's why we do this, right? To find that joy. So yeah, those are hard questions, but good questions anyway. And I think this is a good segue to talk about story. Since we're talking about stories, I want to talk about stories that have been with us literally for thousands of years, and that brings us to your new picture book. So I want to hold it up for everybody. I'm sure you will too, but it's a Christmas story. As you can see, the art is absolutely beautiful. It's called The Animals Speak. And I wonder if you would read to us from it, but and tell us a little bit about what prompted you to want to retell a story that is so ancient and held in such reverence.
Okay, thank you, Kathi. It's the title is, as Kathi said, The Animals Speak. The subtitle is A Christmas Eve Legend. And here's how it begins. Long and long, the story has been told of a young woman, her husband, a donkey, the faithful donkey, carrying them to their ancestral land. Long and long, the story has been of shepherds, angels, sheep, the woolly sheep grazing in the fields. Long and long, the story. And I'll stop there. As you can see, it's a retelling of the nativity story, and then moves into the tradition of the animals getting the capacity of speech at midnight on Christmas Eve is where this heads. And Kathi asked the question, how do I choose to retell a story that is known so deeply? And you can see I retold it in a very light way. I just touch on it in a way that you have to know the story to follow the story. The deeper question for me is, as someone who does not relate as a Christian or as a theist, how could I dare retell the nativity story? And I have done it before. I have another nativity book out there, and it comes out of a very basic place for me. And that is that the piece of Christian theology that has remained vibrant for me and alive and solid is the concept of incarnation, God in us, not as a one-time event, but as an every-time event. And so the nativity story resonates for me, and it comes down to this is a heart piece for me. This is something that speaks to me deeply and out of a place that I can write from.
Okay, I'm going to hold this up again because right on the cover, a camel.
It's a camel. I was thinking that when you were talking, Kathi.
And on the title page too, which y'all probably aren't going to be able to see, but I'm telling you, those camels are smiling.
The camels are there.
Oh, well, you have 2 other books out this year. So here we go. I don't think I'm betraying you by saying that you, Marion Dane Bauer, this month will be celebrating your 83rd birthday. And you have written and published over 100 books. And so how do you keep it fresh? I mean, how do you keep it relevant? I mean, you have 4 books out this year, a novel, this beautiful Christmas book, and 2 other ready to reads, right? That are science-based. And so, but again, how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it relevant? And both questions I think are important.
Okay, I can answer that on several levels. The first and the easiest one to answer is when you're supporting yourself on royalties, you keep doing it. You don't get the option of saying, oh, I don't know, I just don't feel like it, I don't have any ideas, I'm down, I'm flat, I'm whatever. You keep doing it. And part of keeping doing it, and this is the more important answer, is that you have to keep stretching. I couldn't write a novel in pink and then write it in blue and then write it in green. That wasn't going to work. I was going to run out of colors. I was going to write out of novels I could write. I had to keep looking for other things I could do, other things I really could do, things that came out of my heart. The ready to reads are probably for the most part, the least heartfelt of anything I do. I do them, frankly, to make money. But it's not a lot of money, but it's they don't require a lot of time to write. So it's, in terms of hourly pay, it comes out quite nicely. Thank you very much. But I started out approaching Simon & Schuster with saying, I would like to write about weather because I love weather. I love all kinds of weather. That was something that really mattered to me. And I'd done a check, and there were all kinds of things for the mid-level elementary kids, and nothing that I could find for the little ones. And so I started with something I really cared about. My new ready-to-read books are a new series called Our Universe. And I did a lot of research for a picture book called The Stuff of Stars. And I then used that research to move into new things. There will actually be a third one of those out in December, and that will be at Earth. Mars, Moon, and Earth are the ones out. But what matters, I find, and what keeps me fresh is that I have to keep learning. I have to keep finding things that I want to learn, things that excite me about learning. The Stuff of Stars, and then I've sold 2 more picture books to Candlewick, which will be out next year and the year after, are science-based books. I'm not a scientist. I have never, the farthest I got with studying science was biology in high school. I didn't even go on to further high school science topics. I had to take one science class in college, and I took geology because it didn't require the math and didn't require the other kind of more sophisticated scientific understanding. But I am turning to science and being thrilled with it, being thrilled with what I can learn, what I can gather and compress and bring into a kind of jewel-like statement of it. And it keeps me excited, and it keeps me fresh, and it gives me something that even at age 83, I think I have to offer to young people. What I stay away from is anything popular, anything, the current social scene, any of those kind of things, but I've always stayed away from them because I've always been a nerd. I've never had any connection with the social scene that everybody else was connected with. And so I write out of the places that matter to me, that excite me, and that keeps me going. And it keeps me in food on the table day after day.
Oh, I love that so much. You are such an inspiration. You've inspired so many people and so many of us, and not to mention all your readers. And just a side note, but I find those ready to reads, easy readers, probably the most difficult to write. I've never been able to crack that nut. So I really admire you for writing those, especially when you say, oh, I just, write them. And anyway, but Marion, you really are an inspiration. And so we've saved a little time here at the end, and we're going to have time for questions in a bit, but I do want to take the opportunity to turn to the conversation to the college. I mean, I would call you the founding mother. You were the first faculty chair. You brought in the first faculty, which included Carolyn Coleman and Liza Ketchum, and and our most beloved Norma Fox Mazer, among so many others, Eric Kimmel, and some really early heavy hitters that you brought in, and including Tobin, you hired him. And so, would you talk about those days, those early days, and what it was like, what was at stake, and the big challenges that you faced? And if you would, then tell us how you juggled your career to include the hard work of being the faculty chair, combined with being a full-time author. Can you talk about those things?
Well, I would love to talk about the college. It's so dear to my heart. And I'll start with the phone call I got out of the blue asking me if I would be willing to be on the faculty of a new MFA in writing for children and young adults. And I don't remember what I said on that phone call, but I know precisely what I thought. And that was, who in the hell needs an MFA to write children's books? And it wasn't because I don't believe that writing can be taught the way some people say. I believe firmly that a great deal can be taught about writing. There are some factors of it that I know I don't know how to teach. One is a sense of story, and the other is a sense of language. If those can be taught, I don't know how to do it, but so much else can be taught. But my first thought was that graduate programs are expensive. Children's books don't usually make that much money. Editors aren't going to care whether somebody has an MFA or not. What is the point of a graduate program? And so frankly, when I came, I was still feeling a little skeptical. I was still feeling like, well, we'll see. You know, I love teaching. I've been teaching for many years through many different venues, and I was willing to give it a try. I wasn't completely convinced until our first graduating class came through reading, doing their readings for their graduating readings. And I had followed these people for the last, through the last 2 years and 5 residencies. And I was astounded to see how their work had grown. And I've been working with developing writers, as I said, for many, many years, and I've never seen people's work grow the way it grew in that program. And I realized immediately that it was a combination number of factors. People who come into an MFA program are committed. They have to be 100% committed to be there. And so they're really bringing everything to it as part of it. Part of it also is that they're working not just with me, but perhaps with me and with 4 other people. And their work gets stretched and pulled and demanded from different ways. And I think that is the real secret of the growth of, I began to realize, because I had writers here in the Twin Cities area I'd worked with for many years. And after a while, my strengths are their strengths and my blind spots are their blind spots. But the blind spots don't get through when you're working with different faculty. And so I heard those first graduating readings and they just blew me away. And I said, wow, this program matters. It really matters. It was a tough journey through it because we were the first program. There were no other programs like us. They had taken 2 years to get our opening class, and then the next classes were much smaller because they didn't have the time to gather them. And we were told that was the usual pattern the colleges went through, but there was no guarantee that this thing was going to work. And we were all just going at it on the assumption we were there. And there are times along the way we almost didn't work. We almost came apart. But every time, just the strength of the model we were working with, the strength of the people who were supporting us, the strength of the faculty who'd come on board, the strength of the kind of students who signed up, did the job, and we moved forward. And I think the mark of our success is all the other MFA programs in writing for children and young adults that have sprung up across the country, some in very direct imitation of what we were doing. But I have come to feel that it's a wonderful model for learning to take the writing seriously, learning to stretch what you can do in the writing, and one of the most important things, developing a community around you that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, that you can keep going back to for support and for critiques, and for just to know you're not nuts out there doing this thing alone in your study, that maybe nobody in your house can quite appreciate, that there are other people you truly know who support you and care about it too. It's been one of my deepest privileges to be associated with VCFA over the years.
I think so many of us feel that way, Marion. I felt like you were just speaking for all of us who have been part of the program. So I want to thank you so much for that. And thank you for, overcoming your skepticism or stepping up despite your skepticism. I just think we owe you a huge debt. And I do want to turn this, you brought up the, the idea of community and how much we support each other. I remember, as a member of the faculty, feeling like I had, all these new brothers and sisters that we became like this family. And I want to bring this up with your permission. The last almost 2 years has been, a number of things. I can think of plenty of words: unbearable, difficult, challenging. But I also think I can say with some certainty that loss has been a huge part of the last almost 2 years. And so many of us have experienced profound loss recently. I don't think any of us have really been untouched by it. And of course, just being a human means that each of us are going to experience it at some junction in our lives. I mean, it's part of the human bargain. You are born and you're going to experience loss at some point. But that doesn't diminish its power. Just because it's common doesn't diminish its, what it can do to us. And so I know you have been there, and especially with your son, Peter. I remember how hard that was. And if you're willing, can you speak to the way that you navigated those waters?
Okay. Yes, let me speak first about the loss we've all been dealing with in terms of COVID. What I did with that, and I think what many of us have done with that, is I just kept moving forward. I'll admit I moved a whole lot slower than I have moved at some other times in my career, but I kept moving. I kept coming back to the work day after day and doing it because that was what was there to be done. In terms of Kathy's question is related, my son Peter died at age 42 during the time I was teaching at VCFA. And I'm going to talk about it a little because I think it can be an example of something else that is relevant to all of us. And that is, his death happened over 3.5 years. He had a neurological disease, which he died by inches. My oldest grandson, Peter's oldest son, has the same disease now at age 27, is moving in the same direction. And what you do when you're faced with something like that is you just do what we've done through COVID. You just do. You just show up every day because you have no other choice. There's no other place to go except where you are, and nothing to do except what's in front of you to do. I'm still dealing with the grieving process of it's been 12 years, maybe 13, I've almost lost track of, trying to process the grieving process because it was so slow. And by the time he died, our reaction was more relief, than anything else. But that takes me to something else. And that is, I grew up in a family where Feelings of any stripe were not nice. They were not allowed. My parents were both very English. They're both of a generation and a culture that you don't talk about feelings, you don't display feelings. The word my father would use about it when someone was showing some kind of vulnerability is, that's disgusting. And so that's deep, deep inside me, is that sense of not displaying my feelings, not showing them to other people. That's why I'm a fiction writer. That's what takes me to story. The scrim of fiction makes it safe. It's not my feelings, it's my character's feelings. It's not my situation my intimate situation I'm revealing. It's my character's intimate situation I'm revealing. And my background gives me two things. One is it gives me the knowledge of how to hold back so that I'm not just splashing everything on the page. If you just splash emotions on the page, it doesn't reach anyone. But I can hold it back and dole it out in carefully in parts. And it gives me the freedom of feeling those feelings through my characters. And therefore my readers feeling the same feelings. And I've had any number of students show up who with a similar kind of background in terms of how they dealt with feelings. And I have said to them, it can be a strength. Just take it and use it and go with it. I think everything that happens to us in our lives is obviously fodder for our stories. We use it in one way or another. Often we use it without knowing we're using it. I'm sure I've used Peter's death in a number of ways. I couldn't tell you consciously how I've used it, but it's part of who I am now. And so it's part of what I know, and it's part of what I have to bring to a story. And so it's there. It's there in everything I write.
You are a beloved person in our community, and thank you so much for that. You've been a mentor to so many of us, and because of that, we gave you a nickname. Do you want to share?
Yes, you did. And I love the nickname. It was Mama Bear. I was Mama Bear.
Is that not the most perfect nickname for Marion, Mama Bear? We started calling her that, and it just fit. It was like, well, of course, she is a Mama Bear.
No one else in the world knows that nickname, but I carry it with me all the time.
Well, you are our one and only Mama Bear. So I want to finish up our part of it here with a quote that I found just today, this afternoon, from this book. It's by Jeff Tweedy, who is the singer-songwriter for Wilco, the band Wilco. I don't really know his music, but anyway, I love reading biographies. And this is at the very end of the book. He says this about songwriting, but I think we can apply it to our line of work. He says, as long as it's something that makes you feel better, and you wake up every morning wanting to get back in the studio to make something else, then there's not much anyone can fucking do to ruin it. You can find an audience, you can take your time, you can find your voice, you can find new ways to express yourself, you can explore it, you can get better at it. If you keep it close, no one can take that from you. It exists. The beautiful part has existed, and it will continue to exist. And so, Marion, you've left us such a legacy, and I'm so grateful that you were here with me tonight and that we got to do this together. And now I'm going to turn it over to Liz in case there are questions. If you have a question, I hope you've put it in the chat or raise your hand or something. So anyway, Liz, it's all yours, my honey.
Thank you, Kathi. Thank you, Marion. I know that I can speak for everyone here when I say this has been so moving and inspiring, both in terms of sort of the history of what you all brought to the college and the study, that sort of lifelong study that we're all enrolled in forever. But also just these threads of life that you both keep bringing in. It's really what we don't get to see when we only pick up the finished books is, I mean, Kathi, you talked about the 3 Ps, but we get to hear about like the R's, the research and the revision and all this, and the heart stuff that Marion is talking about. It's really such a treat to be let in on. So thank you both for being with us this whole evening.
I know that Marion, I want to just say one thing. I know that Marion said she didn't really remember or recall what she was writing when she was going through everything with Peter. But I remember, Marion, that you wrote a series of ghost books. Do you remember those?
I remember that I wrote them. I didn't remember that that was.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of
yes.
And that kind of
Yes.
yearning for, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I wish we had 2 days, and I guess everyone at the Alumnix Mini Res does. So the rest of us can be envious of that. But we do have some questions. So I would love to hear either or both of you chime in on some of these. And some will come from a particular person and some won't, just because of the way it's popping up in the chat. Animal main characters or people main characters, or is it all the same? And this is someone who's thinking about Runt and the underneath, and would love to hear your take on that.
So, Marion?
All right, I have given some thought to this in the last year or so, and it strikes me that sometimes, especially with the very young stories, there are things you can do with animals that you can't do with human children. Topics you can take on with animals that you can't take on with human children. And because it gives them a different kind of edge when it's a real person involved rather than an animal, and you can go deeper with the animal. I love doing animal characters. I have never done, say, a picture book with animal characters standing in place of children. But I've been thinking about that lately and wondering if there might be something. I think animals give you great power. They also distance you from the human situation. So it does both. Yeah. Kathi, what do you think?
Well, I love writing animal characters because of the viewpoint that they create. Like, just that I like seeing the world through what I imagine an animal character sees the world. Like, for instance, I mean, an obvious thing would be a ground crawler, like a snake. They would see a tree in a completely different way than a bird would see it, or a human would see it for sure. They would see it from the root up, or root down, actually. So I really like, having that animal in a setting and being able to explore the sentience of that setting, the way it feels, the way it sounds, the way it looks. So that's one of the things that I love about an animal character. But you're exactly right about being able to explore situations, that you can't really with humans. You can't just have the babies roaming through the woods. I mean, so yeah.
You could, but we would be worried.
Yeah, exactly. Or, swimming through the swamp. The alligator's great. They're fine in the swampy water, but the babies not so much.
So this is actually a good segue, not to imply that all animals are pets, because of course they're not, but Joyce Ray wants to know, does the world Ps, people, pets, and places, does that focus work best with middle grade, or do the two of you see it as working cross category? Are those just fundamental story connectors?
Well, I think, you know, a little, they're broad. Let me just say that they're broad, first of all, but for me anyway, but when I say pets, I do include, you know, I feel like that includes wildlife, you know, the wolves and bears and whatnot, as well as our domestic pets. But I truly believe that the things that we would die for are one of those three things: people, places, and pets. So they're the essential piece. Now, you know, you can go forever. I've actually made lists of words that start with P that can apply to writing. And power, of course, always comes up because, in a way, you know, story is about power. It's about who has the power, who wants the power, who needs the power, who is powerless. So, you know, so really that's an essential ingredient, an essential P. But as far as what we really need and love and are afraid for, are fearful for, or dislike in big ways, even, you know, you can flip it. It's an emotional thing, one way or the other, are the people and pets and the places in our lives, at least as far as I, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. What a good answer. What about you, Marion?
I think Kathi has answered it perfectly. I'll just leave it with her.
Okay. And I liked that you used a P word to pass it back to Kathi. And I will add that, Kathi, bouncing off of your note around power, that in the program, we have added power and privilege as one of our core topics, along with things like setting and point of view, because we agree with you that it is that essential to understanding relationships and thus story, that we can't really talk about creating either without acknowledging that.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. It's an essential ingredient and must be explored. And I would add that, you know, place has been the one of the three P's, as far as I can see, that we really haven't examined fully. And it comes in a lot with power. You know, that is something that is really, we haven't dealt with it well. You know, it's a provocative. There you go, another P. I'm just slipping it in there for you. It's yeah, I'm so glad that the college is doing that, power and privilege. Yeah, it's important, really important, pivotal.
It's pivot. It's gonna turn into a tongue twister. Okay, I'm gonna move the position of these questions around a little bit, just because since we're talking about those kind of nuts and bolts things, this question from Emily Young is, what is the most important thing a writing teacher or mentor needs to teach their students? No pressure or anything.
I'll jump in on that one. And it's something I've been thinking about lately, because it's something I think I did not always do well, but I think it is crucially important. And that is to teach your students what they are already doing well, to give them that kind of reinforcement, enthusiasm, for their work by you're letting them know, look, you already have this, and then go on from there to say, and this is where you need to grow.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also agree that I haven't always been the best at it, and that is to come at the students' work with kindness, you know, because our stories are so important, and I think, you know, treating them with kindness. That's not to say that, you know, you can't give it a hard look, you know, give a story a hard look, or go, you know, give it an in-depth critique, but I do think that kindness helps. I read Dolly Parton had something to say about that, and it was something along, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it was something along the lines of find your purpose, then go about being it. Something like that. And I think a good teacher can give a gentle nudge to help a student find their purpose. I'll just one example, and this is a very superficial example, but one of my former students, I'm calling you out, Christy Everington. I hope you're here. She has her very first debut picture book that just came out, and when I worked with her, she was writing YA. She was writing a zombie story, and maybe she still is, but somewhere along the semester, I challenged her to set that aside and just try a picture book. And it turns out she had a knack for it. I mean, I could tell from the things she was writing that she was born to write picture books, and I told her that, and here she is with her first picture book. So, I mean, that's kind of a superficial example, but probably not to Christy, because it totally worked. But, and I'm not always that astute, but, but I think just, looking for those ways to be purposeful and to be understanding and kind. So.
I love those answers, because there's all the skills and elements of craft that we all actually really love talking about and working on and practicing, but just that reminder of what a human endeavor it is really so important. Yeah. So one of our newest faculty members, Alex Sanchez, is here, and he asks, Marion, could you speak about Am I Blue and how it came about at that time?
That is,
I would love to talk
that's
about
an
Am
iconic, essential book. If you haven't read it, read it.
Am I Blue, for those of you who don't know, it is a collection of original short stories with gay or lesbian theme. It was published, I believe, I want to say 1992. I believe I could be off a year or so. And here, the story behind it is this. I have always seen myself and been seen by others as a children's writer, as a truth teller. I took on hard topics. The first novel I wrote, which ended up being published as my second novel, was about sexual molestation in the name of Jesus. And this was published in 1977. So you can figure, this is what I was doing. I was very slow learner, very late in coming to terms with my sexuality. I was 47 by the time I finally understood who I was and acknowledged it and left a marriage and began to live, found a relationship with a woman, began to live a very different life. And at that time, being out as gay or lesbian in the children's book community was a death sentence. This is it, just was not, it was inconceivable. And so I was out in every aspect of my personal life, but I wasn't out professionally. And I would travel to speak, and I would have conversations with people, and they would bare their souls to me. And I couldn't tell them anything what was going on in my life, because I couldn't say the most mundane things about my partner and about the things we were doing. And I finally realized that here I was seeing myself as a truth teller, and on a topic that was so crucially important that young people were dying for lack of information, that you could be gay or lesbian and live a productive, happy, viable life, because people weren't out there saying, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing, that I was being silent, and that it wasn't a viable thing to do. My first thought was to go to other gay and lesbian children's writers and say, come out with me. And then I thought, can't do that. It's too personal, it's too private. And at that point, it was too potent. No one had a right to ask anyone else to do that. So my second thought was to create a collection, get the best writers I knew who I thought would be capable of writing on the topic, regardless of their sexuality. The kind of names that would force librarians to put the book on a library shelf, because it had these amazing people in it. And I did it. I got people on board and we got the book gathered. Along the way, when I was doing it, I was at that point working with two editors, one at Scholastic and one at Clarion. My Clarion editor, Jim Giblin, was supportive. My Scholastic editor was very cautious. She was a lesbian, Jim was gay, very cautious about the whole thing and very concerned about my doing it. And I think she was afraid that I might not be able to be published at Scholastic any longer. When it came to the final moments, and Jim, in fact, wrote a story for the collection. And Jim asked me, are you coming out in your bio connected with your story? Because I wrote one too. And I said, yes, I am. And he was appalled. He did not want me to do it. And I was in the last moments where I could have rewritten my bio. And I then had a conversation with my Scholastic editor, and she said, are you coming out? And I said, yes. And there was a long silence. And then she said, well, for every door that's closed, perhaps another will be opened. And I thought, I think that's it exactly. And I didn't change my bio. The book was published. It was the first commercially successful book on gay and lesbian themes in the young people's book to be published, which is why it was so groundbreaking. And I'm sure some doors were closed, but I never heard the slam. I was too busy with other things. And I'm more proud of that book than of anything I've ever written just on my own.
Thank you, Marion. And Alex, thank you so much for asking that question.
I found the Dolly Parton quote, y'all.
Okay, good.
Okay, she said, find out who you are and then be that on purpose.
On purpose. I like that.
Me too. Me too. You are really our mama bear, Marion.
Yeah, I'm really struck, Marion, by your opening doors in so many ways through your literature and at the college, and then inviting people to come on in with you. So thank you so much for sharing those stories and the vulnerability, but also the strength. So we have not a lot of time left, but this question from Sharon Van Zandt actually resonates, I think, with Alex's question. For both of you, do you find that you tread the same themes or variations of the same themes in your books?
Yes. I don't know how many years and how many novels I was into writing when I realized, because someone else talked about the theme of my book, that I was repeating myself every time. And it just appalled me. I thought, my career is over. I have nothing further to say. Where can I go from here? And so at that point, I sat down, wrote a novel called Ghost Eye, and it was the first time I'd ever written an animal story, which was so totally new for me. And it was an odd-eyed white cat who saw the real world out of his gold eye and ghosts out of his blue eye. And that was going to be just totally different. It was not going to be another Marion Dane Bauer story. And I got to the last moment. This cat has been holding himself back from the little girl in the house who wants him to be his cat, because he's a show cat and he's above all that. And at the very end of the story, he's in despair and about to leap out of a window. And he turns back and jumps onto the bed with the little girl and snuggles up with her. And I said to myself, you've just written another Marion Dane Bauer story. And so be it. That's where that's where you are. That's where I'm going to be. I decided if writers like Hemingway could repeat their themes, I could get by with it too.
You were being you on purpose, right? Holly would be proud. Yeah, I know I repeat the same themes over and over. You know, I think that's me being me and being on purpose. Yeah. But you know, there are times when I think I need to write something different. But oh well, maybe in my next life.
Well, to your readers, it is different. It's always wearing different clothing, but there's that familiar heartbeat that so many readers have fallen in love with and connected with in both your work, Kathi, and your work, Marion. And we are so grateful. We are so grateful to you for that work and for being here tonight. We would stay until the cows came home, but we need to sign off. So I'm going to pass the microphone back to Katie and with my gratitude. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
All right. Thank you to Kathi and to Marion. That was a very transformative hour and a half. I know we all had a lot of feelings. Thank you to Liz for being our gracious host and moderator in this space. Thank you to all of you for being here. We had a really wonderful turnout. Most of you stuck around to the bitter end, so thank you for that. We are, as noted, recording this. I'll make sure that folks who are on this, who are part of this event, get a link to that recording when it goes up on the website. We will have more events. Just as an FYI, we have regular events at VCFA. We have our book birthday party series where alums from our program get together to celebrate their new releases. That's a Zoom event. That the next one's going to be the 16th of November. The 17th of November, if you are unaware, is the National Book Awards, and we will be celebrating Kekla Magoon, who is one of our own, both as an alum and faculty member. And the 18th of November, it's a busy week, is an event we have at VCFA called Friendsgiving. So for those of you who are alums, you'll get information about that in your alum inbox. But for all of you, you're welcome to come to our website and sign up for links to a whole bunch of events from a number of our programs, our film program, our music program. We're going to have some amazing events all online. And from our program, Nova Rensuma and Emily XR Pan are going to be in conversation with alum Tanya Adelot about their website and book Foreshadow. And I get to make a couple fun and faculty-ish announcements. One is that Emily will be coming on board as faculty in our program, not this winter, but in the summertime. She has a big book coming out this spring, so she gets to do that first. And the other is that Kathi is going to be faculty in our program in January. So some of you, if you are enrolled students, might get the chance to work with Kathi in January. So thank you all for coming. Link is forthcoming. It was so wonderful to host all of you. I'm going to stop the recording. And I'll hang out for 5 minutes, 10, it's just if folks want to unmute and say hello. But we will officially end now.